I am so excited to be here. This is my first year at Devoted. I'm from California. My name is Laurie Short. And I'm going to talk about a little bit what I alluded to in the question answer time about intergenerational friendships, but mainly the power of friendship in your faith. Now, I don't know about you, but I know for me, I've needed help as I've been growing up. I am older. I know from far away, I speak to kids, so I look young, but when you get up close, you'll see I am older than a lot of you in the room. And I will tell you that my journey is maybe like some of you. I didn't grow up in a classical Christian home. I actually grew up in a Serbian Orthodox home, so I was baptized as a baby by a priest who didn't speak English. But my mom said that the priest held me down in the water so long she was concerned that I was going to drown. So that might have some explanation to what I'm doing today. I don't know. But it was really my senior year in high school that I met the Lord. And I just told this story on an Instagram post that I just did, but I met the Lord through a boyfriend in high school, and it was an incredibly meaningful relationship of 3 weeks, and that was the course of most of my relationships, and it was going to be his birthday in the 3 weeks that we were dating, and so just to give you a level of my spirituality, I said, well, I want to give you a keg party at my house. And he said, well, I promised my Young Life leader that I would go to this camp. And I said, well, then, of course, I'm going with you. I mean, we're practically married. And so he agreed. And we were that couple in the back of the bus making out the whole way there, had no idea where I was going. Never underestimate the motivation that gets you where you need to go, where God is going to speak to you, because that weekend changed my life. I ended up standing up and making a commitment to Christ, and it was the furthest thing from my mind when I was going on that trip. And I will be sad to say that my boyfriend and I broke up the week after, but Jesus and I have been together ever since. That is the one relationship. But as you can imagine, meeting the Lord that way, I needed help in my life. And so I have had relationships with older women. I have solicited older women in my life that have changed my faith. We need each other. We are not meant to do the Christian life alone. And I ended up, going on from there. It was not on my mind to go into the ministry. I was going to be an actress. I went to UCLA and studied theater arts, and you can see how well that career's going. But I ended up getting snatched by the Lord along the way and started my ministry career speaking to youth and youth workers and training youth workers through an organization called Youth Specialties. And then in the course of all that time, I figured when you knew the Lord that you now had someone in your pocket that was going to do what you wanted him to do. And so I told him that I'd like to get married at about 25. I wasn't the ring by spring gal, but I thought, 25, Lord, that would be good. And when that came and went and I hit 30, I started praying a little bit louder and recruiting some other people in that prayer. I was just starting to speak, and so there were literally people all over the country going, Lord, have mercy, and bring this girl a husband. And I thought, well, surely now. And so when I hit 40, and I was still single, I began to suspect that God was deaf. I don't know if you've ever had that suspicion, but I just could not understand. Now, I met other people who were single and perfectly happy being single, but I, at this point, was a professional bridesmaid. I had so many dresses in my closet. Now I'm watching all my friends have their kids and their families and their husbands. And I'm like, Lord. And I don't know if there's a woman in here that's been sitting on a prayer for a long time or wondering, where is God in this desire of my heart? But I am so glad you came today, because we do have such a tender God, but he does not do things always the way we want. That is part of his plan versus our plan. So at 42, when I got engaged, you can imagine the hallelujah chorus broke out in my household. I'm not kidding. My mom had those bridal showers so fast. I think I got every gift on my wedding registry. I'm not kidding. So just about 2 months short of my wedding date, my fiance, who was a Marine reservist, got deployed. And he was going to be gone 9 months. And I thought, well, I've waited this long, I can wait just a little bit longer. And we had furniture in the home when he went off. And unbeknownst to me, his ex-wife, who had left him, began having second thoughts and was writing him while he was away. And so when he came back, we broke up, and he remarried his ex-wife, which I want to be clear to say, just as Shannon mentioned, was an amazing story. I mean, when two people can find their way back together, I want to say from this stage, I am for that in marriage. I just didn't like my part in the story. And I will tell you that there were well-meaning Christians who said, well, isn't it great that God used you to bring them back together? And I'm like, you know what, it's fabulous, and I hope you have the same opportunity someday. But I don't know if you have ever experienced this kind of thing in your life, and maybe it didn't have anything to do with companionship or marriage. Maybe it was some other heartbreak in your life of not being able to have a child, or whatever it felt like everyone around you had that you did not have. And then to go through that, you have to understand that I wasn't just the person going to church at that point. I was the person out speaking. And I could not believe this God that I had committed my life to, thought I was strong enough to go through that. But ladies, that event changed my life, and it changed my faith. And now that's why I write books the way I do. Some of you have been back to the book table and gone, wow, faith in the dark, God's mysterious timing. There must be a story behind this table. Well, now you know. And I'm going to leave the story right there. I know some of you have probably looked at the little diamond on my finger, so you know that that's probably not where the story ended. But we're going to leave it there as we talk about two women. And I want to just focus on their story for my time with you. It's the story of Ruth and Naomi, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with that story. It's just a tiny, tiny book in the Old Testament. But I don't know if you've ever thought about this. The beginning of the book begins in tragedy, kind of like where I just left you in my story. That's where Ruth 1 begins. Everybody's husband dies. And you have these three women that are left. And Naomi is the mother-in-law, and her two daughters-in-law. She's lost her husband and both of her sons. And so she's in so much grief that she's been in Moab all this time. She and her husband apparently went there, and that's how her sons met Moabite women. And so she had lived a lot of her life there, but she's like, I have no one here, and I'm too old to get remarried. I need to go back to Israel, to my people. And that's when Ruth, actually both daughters-in-law, and this is maybe a word to mothers-in-law, they adored their mother-in-law. They did not want to leave her side, and they wanted to go with her. And she finally said, no, daughters, you must go back. You can get married again. I can't. You've got to go back to your people. And so one of them finally does. Her name is Orpah, which I don't recommend for a woman's name, but hopefully there's no one named Orpah in the room. Anyway, she goes back, and then there's Ruth, who will not leave her mother-in-law. And I believe I have the verse on the screen that maybe some of you heard in a wedding and assumed it was between a man and a woman, and it's between a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law. And she says these words, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So I want to make some observations about this relationship that I think are going to help you as you think about friendship in your life. And the first thing that we see right off the bat is that Ruth must have paid attention to Naomi's life. And here's why I know that. Naomi is in grief. In fact, if you read some of the things she says, she's not even really being that good of a Christian at the beginning. She's like, oh, my life is wrecked. God hates me. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. I know I have, where it's like, I've got nothing to give. And it's right in that space that Ruth commits herself to her. So she must have seen other things in Naomi's life. Naomi lived out her faith all along, and she saw something in her. So I want to encourage you, if you're just thinking about this, I mentioned up here that it would be a good idea to have someone who's older in your life. And you're thinking, well, how would I even go about doing that? Because asking someone to do that when you don't even really know who they are, that's a big ask. And I want to say that, like Ruth, you need to become an observer. And that can happen in church as you're watching people, watching the way they are, watching how often they come to church, watching the way they are with others, or it can happen in a small group. That, I think, is a great way to get to know other women, is just to join a short-term small group for 8 weeks. And you can begin to get to know the spiritual life of some women around you, but be thinking about, how can I find someone who can be in my life? I have always had an older woman in my life. And I could spend a lot of time telling you about those women, but I don't want to get off of the limited time that I have. But I would really encourage you. That's what Ruth did. And so she made a decision to go with Naomi. You also see in this passage that Ruth initiated the relationship. In fact, Naomi didn't even really want her to go. So, we talked up here about taking initiative in friendship, and maybe sometimes, the person, for whatever reason, is in a walk of life that isn't going to be super responsive right away. Again, leave room for that. But ultimately, Naomi allowed Ruth to go with her, because the reason Naomi didn't want Ruth to go with her is because she felt like Ruth had a life ahead of her. Don't come with me. You're going to sacrifice everything to come with me. You'll never find anyone to marry if you come with me. You need to go home. And Ruth felt called by God to be with Naomi. She decided, no, I want to take care of you. I want to go with you. There was something in Ruth's heart that knew she needed to be with Naomi. And that decision ended up changing her life. Because the next thing that we see is that Naomi said yes. Ultimately, Naomi did say yes. Now, here's maybe a word to some of the older people in this room that might have someone approach you and say, you know what, I'd really like to spend some time with you. What is the first thing we think of? Shannon did such a beautiful job talking about this. The first thing that we think is, oh no, not me. You don't know. As soon as you get to know me, you're going to be so disappointed because I'm not this and I'm not that and I'm not. Well, think of Naomi. She wasn't anything when Ruth decided to go with her. In fact, she had big needs when Ruth decided to go with her. Sometimes when we're being asked to be in relationship, we need to have the courage to say yes, even in our imperfect selves. We don't have to get it together to get in a relationship. We simply need to bring ourselves because God is going to use that, and we have to trust him. And that certainly was the case with Ruth and Naomi. So now we get to the good stuff. And this is where Naomi ends up helping Ruth find her bigger story. So these two women, they go to Israel, and they just happen, I always like to say that in quotes, just happen to end up in a little town called Bethlehem. And I bet you've never heard of that town before. And this is way, way, way pre-Jesus. They ended up in Bethlehem. And that is where Naomi's people were. And so Ruth goes out to work for Naomi. And the way that she would do this is Naomi knew that this practice with the Israelites is that some landowners, if they were God followers, if they were Jewish, they would leave some of their sheaves behind for the people who were poor to be able to gather them so they would have food. And it was something that they did. So she knew that. So Ruth went out and she started to gather these sheaves because she was the younger woman. And she caught the attention of a man named Boaz. Boaz was a wealthy landowner, and he noticed her. And it wasn't just because she was a babe. It was because she was helping somebody else. And he could see that. She was working so hard. So he asked about her, and he comes to find out that she is Naomi's daughter-in-law, and she is gathering sheep. So he wants to make it easy for her and ends up leaving extra food for her. And so Ruth comes home and starts telling her mother-in-law about this wealthy landowner, and lo and behold, it's a distant relative of Naomi, and she's, a mother-in-law, so she's starting to go, wait a minute, I'm starting to think something might be happening here. And so this whole bachelor kind of barn situation gets set up. And let me just tell you how it worked back then. I don't recommend this today, but she told Ruth, if you go to the barn where he's sleeping, just plant yourself at his feet, sleep, and when he wakes up, he'll know you're interested in him. Now, if someone tells you to do that, I'm just going to say right here, I know you guys have a lot of hay here in Lexington, but don't do that. Don't do that today. But for whatever reason, Boaz woke up, there she was, and he could not believe she was interested in him, and he went to bat to try to get her to be his wife. And it's this beautiful story. And maybe some of you don't know this, but do you know who Boaz's mother was? Rahab. Rahab the prostitute, who ended up getting grafted in by the Israelites, is the one who had this godly son. So you can't tell me that God can't work in a life to redeem the generations that follow. I love this story so, so much. So what ends up happening is Ruth ends up as one of 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus because she followed her mother-in-law because of her faith. She wanted to be with Naomi. She wanted to care for Naomi, and God was working the bigger story around what was happening. And that's what I want to talk about. Did you know that we live these micro stories with each other? But we have no idea the bigger story that is being weaved around us while we're living these relationships in our life. And it starts with friendship. When I broke my engagement, I was brokenhearted. For 4 months, I was back in my apartment with all my shower gifts in his garage. I did not even have the strength to go get them. They're like, you gotta go get your gifts. My friends are like, you gotta go. I'm like, I can't. I couldn't even get out of bed. And I was so devastated during that time. And I get this random call from this old friend of mine whose name was John Ireland. He had planted a church in Santa Barbara, and he's like, Laurie Polich, that was my maiden name, Laurie Polich, I heard you got married. I'm like, nope. And he goes, well, that's not actually why I'm calling. We were praying about this new position at our church, and your name came up. I don't know if you're interested. And ladies, I was not looking for a job. I was devastated in my life. But I always say to people, you might be so focused on the door that you want to see open that you miss the door that is opening. And one door can lead to another door that leads to another door that can actually lead to the door you want. It's just a different route. You've got a God who's leading you. You're not leading the God. And so you're not leading God, I should say. He is leading you. And so I remember at that time I had a really good friend, my friend Stacy, and she's like, you've been waiting for this. This is what's going to create change. And I just was like, you're right. And ladies, you'll appreciate this. I was jogging. I finally decided to go and take this job and move to Santa Barbara, and I was jogging on this path, and I used to jog. I walk now, but I was jogging on this path, and you always see the same people, and I saw this guy who I would see, and I go, guess what? I'm moving to Santa Barbara. And he goes, oh, no. And I said, what do you mean, oh, no? Santa Barbara is beautiful. He goes, oh, no. There are no single people in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is the home of the newlywed and nearly dead. You are never going to meet anyone there. And I remember running away going, perfect, God. But I thought to myself, that is exactly what happened to Ruth. Everyone was saying, if you follow Naomi, there won't be anybody. And she said, well, then I'm trusting because this is what I'm supposed to do. And sometimes we have to trust in spite of the odds. And ladies, it turns out that there was one single guy in Santa Barbara. And the beautiful part of the story is that at this point, I am now 48 years old when I meet him. And he ended up proposing in Haiti on a mission trip. Too many stories to tell. You can look at all the stuff. But I do have a picture of the three of us when we got married. So I think that's up on the screen. I can't see. Yes, that precious little boy. I figured God knew I waited so long that I got two for the price of one. And his mom ended up moving to Australia. She had actually left Jerry, and she met a man in Australia. And so I ended up getting to raise him. He was 6, and I have a picture of what he looks like today. And this next picture, I think, shows that. Now you will notice, funny thing, if you happen to remember at all, that I was engaged to a Marine who got deployed. So what's interesting about my story, ladies, is it started in the brokenness, just like Ruth. It started with the broken story, not with meeting the husband at 49 years old, which usually makes young girls go to prayer. No, God, no. It started in the brokenness. Because I was engaged to a Marine, I ended up meeting Melissa, who's back at my table, and her husband is a 30-year Marine. He retired as a colonel, and her father-in-law was a 3-star general under Norman Schwarzkopf. Her son is a recon Marine, and we ended up staying together even though my boyfriend and I broke up, and she was a bridesmaid in my wedding, and so her family and our family, we kind of raised our kids together, and Jordan saw all of this in that family. My husband has no military in his background that he knew. His dad was passed away. My family had no military, but because of the family that I met, because of my broken engagement, our son decided to become a United States Marine. And so this was not anything we knew was going to happen. This next picture shows a picture of, you probably can't even tell the boys apart, but Jordan is one of them, and Ian, Melissa's son, is the other one, and it was Ian who inspired Jordan to become a Marine. And the bigger story that God was weaving through all of the mess, and I needed my friends to speak into my life all along the way to help me keep hanging on to this wild and crazy God that we serve. And sometimes you have to just hold on in spite of everything. And so this last thing that I want to say is that Ruth helped Naomi find a new chapter of life. Yes, Ruth got this amazing new life by following Naomi, but Naomi got a new chapter too. And so what is so beautiful about the story is what they gave each other in relationship. It's never one-sided. And so Naomi gets to have another grandchild, and she becomes a mother-in-law again, and all the things that she didn't have and lost, she got again. And God has not forgotten you. Sometimes we wake up in the middle of scenes in our story, and I always say, sometimes we think it's over. It was over for me. And then I woke up the next day. Have you ever had that happen? It's like, wait a minute, I thought it was over for me. Well, apparently not, because I'm up this morning. And so I always say, if you got up this morning and you're still breathing, God is not through with your story. He's not. And it's never too late, no matter what it is. We put timelines on things, but it's never too late. Yes, I never had a child out of my body, but I got to raise a child. I got to be a mom every other way. I was a youth pastor. I came along as a mentor to people. If you're loose on your definition of what you're looking for and what you want, and give God the freedom to answer your prayer, He might answer it differently than you prayed, but He will answer it. He will answer it. And so you hold on to God and you hold on to each other. And I want to introduce to you the woman who has prayed me through. She was a woman I met when I was a youth pastor in Berkeley. I ended up living in her home for a year. She and her husband, they had 2 boys, and they thought it would be fun to have a girl for the first time. And I was new in the area, so I lived upstairs, and I just observed her. I watched her, and I wanted her in my life, and her name was Vivian. She is still in my life. She's 87 years old, but I interviewed her in her early 80s, and before you watch this video, it's just a minute long, you're going to meet Vivian. She's going to talk a little bit about our relationship, but then she's going to talk about something that happened when I was on my way to see her. And I got a call from the church that she was at, and the pastor said, "You need to pull over." And I did. And she said, "You're about to get to Vivian's home, and her husband has been killed in a plane crash. And I needed to tell you before you got there." And so it was devastating and holy all at the same time that I happened to show up at that moment to be there for my mentor, who was always there for me. And so she talks a little bit about that. You're going to watch this, and then we'll close in prayer. Let's watch.
I remember when Laurie first came into my life. She was at our church as a youth pastor. We always enjoyed each other, but I think Laurie and I really became friends, and the relationship deepened as we began to share things. Women always have things to share, and usually often they're things of the heart. But that doesn't start immediately. You have to learn to trust somebody. But I think we became deeper friends as we began to share things that were hard. It was a great privilege to be able to pray with her, to be able to look at scripture together and wonder about some things and marvel at some things. And we knew we could trust each other. I knew I could say things to Laurie that she wouldn't share, and I think she knew that with me too. Laurie had many boyfriends, many relationships that just weren't quite right. And we used to bemoan the fact, and we couldn't understand the fact. And part of our relationship was not understanding always what God was doing. And we questioned that between us and would ask God, "What are you doing, Lord? Why is it happening this way?" And so we grew together in that. My husband died suddenly in an accident, and it was God's timing was incredible, because it was that very weekend, that very day, that Laurie was to arrive to stay with me for a few days while my husband was away, and the accident happened away. And so Laurie was on her way to my house when that happened, and that we always saw that as a God thing. God always surprises you with gifts, especially of friendship and of closeness, that you have a plan for. You didn't know that was going to happen. And when they do, you cherish them.
My Vivian, I love her so much, yes. And, I just want to encourage you ladies as you leave here today. Friendship isn't perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. And there is a room full, a world full of people who need you. And particularly, I want to commission the women who are older, 50 and older in this room, that younger women need you. And I know there's some younger women in here, and I want to commission you that you need older people in your life. We need each other because of the richness of those relationships. I am a different person because of my relationships. And I pray that you will leave today knowing that you need that too. And you can't orchestrate all of it. As she even mentioned, it happens, some of it happens organically, but you can position yourself in places. It's not going to happen by staying home alone. It's going to happen by coming like you did today, and by getting involved in a small group, by getting involved in your church, by getting to know people, and then deciding that you want to maybe take a friendship to a different level, invite them to coffee. Tell an older woman that you just want to have coffee with them. Believe me, that older woman will be honored to do that with you. And I hope we leave here today different because we are better together. Let me pray. Oh God, I want to pray for every woman in this room. We've all had friendships that have been hurtful. We've all had insecurities. We've all wondered if we had anything to give a relationship. We've all wondered how to even start relationships. All of us. I don't know why we come into rooms and imagine that everybody else has it together but us, but none of us do. And you call us to be together because you want us to grow together as the body. And I just pray that every woman in this room would be known and loved and supported, and that she would take responsibility for getting herself in a place where that can happen. And so, God, we thank you for this conference. We thank you for the heart of this conference. And most of all, we thank you for being the crazy, amazing, wild, huge God that you are. And we love you. In Jesus' name.